Okay. Okay, we're in progress. Okay. Okay, so tonight we're starting with a new series on the Chaggai, which are the 12 minor prophets. And they're short books in our Tanakh. Often these books are overlooked. And it's very interesting just to explore these different prophets, just to hear their messages, what they spoke about then. And it's something we don't really learn about in school. I don't think I even knew what it was until I came to seminary for my year in Israel. And then we started to learn Tanakh in depth and see that there are all these different short books of prophets. We have Chaggai, Zechariah, Amos, Tzfanya, right? Like names that maybe we've heard a little bit about, but we don't really know so much. We don't have that chance to really dive into them. So what I wanted to do is just starting off this week, is each week to choose a different Navi and to explore one of their messages. They come with a lot of messages and they also span different time periods, okay? So tonight's prophet is Chaggai, and I really happen to love Chaggai. Chaggai is only 2 prakim, Parak Aleph and Parak Bet. And just a little background, Chaggai is from one of the time periods that I absolutely love learning about, the time period of Shivat Zion, the period when we were allowed to return to Eretz Israel after the Galut of Bavel. Right? We were in exile in Bavel. The first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. We were sent to Bavel. And then Cyrus, a Persian king, took over the Babylonian Empire, became the Persian Empire, and Achashverosh comes later on, happens to be one of the kings of this Persian Empire and the story of Purim, right? This is before that. Cyrus, he takes over Babylon and he has a new policy. His politics are completely different, that he allows nations to return back to the different places that they come from, to preserve their identities, to rebuild their temples. So the famous Cyrus proclamation, Hatzarat Koresh, that the Jews are suddenly allowed to go back to Israel and to build the Beit HaMikdash. Now we have this incredible chazon, we have this vision of returning, right? We've been sent into Galut. We have the prophecy of Yirmiyahu telling us after 70 years, you're going to be allowed to come back and you're going to be able to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. The question of when these 70 years begins and when the 70 years then thereafter ends is in debate. When did it begin and when does it end? The 70 years, just as we see as well with the slavery of Mitzrayim, that different Parshanim have different ways of counting. We're not going to get into that, right? But basically we come back and Cyrus allows us to build the Beit HaMikdash. We start the building and there's anti-Semitism. There's tension with the other nations that are around us. And they send this letter to the Persian king at the time, not Cyrus, the one after him. And they send a letter telling the king to stop, to have a building freeze, right? A term that we recognize from our days in Medina Israel. There's a building freeze. We have to stop building. There's an edict that we're no longer allowed to build the Beit HaMikdash. So all we've built so far are the foundations and the Mizbeach, right? But that's all we have. And the Beit HaMikdash, therefore, is lying in ruins for 18 years. There's this building freeze, okay? And we learn about this. We see this from Sefer Ezra and Nehemiah, 2 leaders of the time that are part of this, that are very important, significant figures during Shivat Zion, the return to Zion, okay? So if we look at Ezra in our first source, we see that Chaggai and Zechariah referred to in Parak Hey of Ezra, the first source on our page. Then the prophets, Chaggai the prophet and Zechariah son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews in Yehuda and Yerushalayim, inspired by the God of Israel. Thereupon Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Yeshua, son of Yotzadak, and they are also 2 huge, big leaders, spiritual leaders during this time, began rebuilding the house of God in Yerushalayim with the full support of the prophets of God. If you notice in Ezra, it doesn't go into the details of what this prophecy was, right? So we look, but we see a reference to it, and then we go to Sefer Chaggai, which is the prophet that we are focusing on today, and we start to see his prophecy. And he's prophesying during the 2nd year of Dariavesh, Okay, Bishnat Shtaim L'Darayavesh over here in Parak Aleph, Pasuk Aleph is the second year. On the first day of the 6th month, this word of the Lord came through the prophet Chaggai to Zerubbabel, to Yeshua, the high priest. And this is what he says, Ko Amar Hashem, okay? And the prophet is coming here and he says to them, Ha'am hazeh amru lo et bo et beit Hashem lihibanot. Okay, what's going on here? There's an 18-year building freeze. We know that there's a political reason for this building freeze. That's what would I say, the tip of the iceberg, right? That's the political reason. There was an edict sent out. We're not allowed to build the Beit HaMikdash. But Chaggai is coming in and he's coming to tell us a message, coming to explain to us that there's something else going on under the surface. Right? And as Rav Yuval Shurlo explains beautifully, that the role of a Navi, oftentimes when we think about a prophet, what do we think? It comes to mind that they foretell the future, right? They tell us what's going to happen. But as he explains, that's really something that's very minor in the role of a prophet. A prophet is there to interpret the present. He's there to explain to us the divine messages that are what's going on in our current reality. Right? What is God happy with what we're doing? Does he want us to redirect the direction that we're going in? Do we need to make a shift? Right? The prophet is there for us to understand what's going on now, not necessarily what's going on in the future. And the way that we respond to this prophecy, yes, will have an effect on the future. If we don't heed the words of the prophet, then yes, there can be this doom and destruction, as we know from Yirmiyahu, that he's a prophet that was not listened to. Although he begged, he was tortured and jailed. The people did not listen to the prophecies of Yirmiyahu to return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so the people are saying, and he's explaining here, that the people are saying it's not the time to build the Beit HaMikdash. That time has not yet come. And if we look at Radak, right, he explains from what's going on is that what basically, right? Because the oppressors of Israel, what they did was they came and they made sure that the building would be canceled out because they sent these anti-Semitic letters to the Persian king sitting in Persia and told them the Jews are a rebellious nation, and so therefore he did not allow them to continue to build. So what happened? They despaired from building the Beit HaMikdash, and they said, the time for building has still not come. But even though they knew that those 70 magical years, right, the 70 years that Yirmiyahu spoke about, even though they knew that those 70 years had come when it's the second year of Daryavesh, okay? So the 70 years, if you count it from the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, so therefore the second year of Daryavesh marks the 70 years, right? V'hayalem ladat, in the third line, they should have known that it wasn't in vain that God brings them up from the exile. And even though there wasn't a prophet yet that has told them that they should start to build, hayalem lachel me'atzmam, they should have started rebuilding from themselves. Ulehitorer. And the word hitoreru, to awaken, is a word that we see spanning through this time of Shivat Zion, because this is a time of hitorerut, of awakening, right? And they should have woken up. Why? They should have realized that their actions were not fruitful, as we're going to see in the next psukim when we continue on in Chaggai, that they were sowing their fields and there was barely any produce, right? That they were thirsty. There was this drought. If we look up in the psukim here, this is back to Chaggai, right? You have sown much and brought in little. You eat without being satisfied. You drink without getting your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one gets warm. And he who earns anything earns it for a leaky purse. Whatever you're earning is just falling through your purse as if there's a hole in it, right? You should have known by looking around that you're in a drought, right? It's not going well for you. You should have realized this. You should have woken up and started building on your own account. And they should have known, they should have known, right? That this is their punishment. This drought that's going on, it's because they had despaired from building. They stopped building. But when God saw that they did not awaken from themselves, they did not take that initiative, that's when the Navi is sent. Shalach lehem bayad Chaggai Navi. God has to tell them the message. They didn't get that message on their own. They didn't interpret what was happening, right? They didn't look around. And if we go back into the Psukim, we see here in Pasuk Gimel, Vayid Hashem biyad Chaggai Navi lemor. And this is the pasuk, the main pasuk that's in bold. Ha'ed lachem atem lashevet bevatechem sfunim v'habayit hazeh charev. Is it the time for you to dwell in your paneled houses? That means that you're living in nice, comfortable homes. V'habayit hazeh charev. And this house, right, this Beit HaMikdash is lying here in ruins. God is saying to you, look around, open your eyes, see what's going on, as what we just read in Pasuk Vav, that you're sowing a lot, but you're bringing in little, you're eating, and you're not being satisfied. So what's interesting is that Rav Shurlo explains is that this is a very well-known phenomenon in our history and something that we've seen throughout. That sometimes a situation that's not ideal, we would call it a b'diavad situation, sometimes it becomes a lechatchila situation, right? And a great example of that is the galut of Bavel, the exile from Bavel. When we left Bavel, it was horrible, right? We have that imagery of us walking out, our captors are carrying the vessels from the Beit HaMikdash, and we're singing those famous lines, Ech nashir et shir Hashem al admat nechar. How could we possibly sing the song of God on a foreign land? We couldn't understand. We thought it was the end of Judaism. How could we possibly go on, right? But then when we have this opportunity to return, right? We have this opportunity to return with the new king of Persia. Do most of the people heed the call? Do most of the people go back when we're allowed to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash? No. The minority returns, the majority stays back, right? We see that also in Mitzrayim, that the sages explain, Chamushim alu, only a fifth of the people left Mitzrayim, right? They were in Mitzrayim, but when they look back at Mitzrayim, they see it as this lechatchila situation. They see it as an ideal situation when they look back. And the majority of the people stayed in Egypt, right? Oftentimes, we turn something that's not ideal into an ideal situation, right? But here, what Chaggai is trying to say, and what we should have understood, is that the conditions have changed. Yes, we had this edict. There was a decree that we had to stop building, but there's a new king now, right? And we're not sure exactly what the external circumstances were. It doesn't say here explicitly, but things have changed, right? The reality is changed, and there's a chance, there's a window of opportunity now to resume the building. And Hashem brings this drought, right? And the Navi is sent here to tell us, he's sent here to interpret this current reality, to let us know what if this is ideal and what's not ideal. And through this drought, we can see this is not ideal. Chaggai is telling them, you might see this as something else bad that's happening to you, right? Until now, when we've returned, bad thing after bad thing has happened, right? We come back with that spark in our eye. We have this vision that we're allowed to come back. We're allowed to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And then we get there and it's less than ideal. It's less than ideal situation because there isn't so much manpower. There's lack of resources. We have tensions with the nations around us, the anti-Semitism that's going on. We saw ourselves as the victims. And Chaggai is coming here, and he's coming from the opposite angle. And he's coming to tell us, no, this is on you right now, right? This batzoret, this drought, it's a result of the fact that you got used to this reality. You forgot that desire that we had to build. And what are you doing instead? You're devoting yourselves to building your own pretty houses, right? You're bringing in the interior designers. You're setting up your kitchens, right? You're having that bathroom that you've always wanted, right? You're not paying attention. You're not paying attention, and you're not interpreting what Hashem is trying to tell you. And he's coming to say to them, you can elevate yourselves above this, right? In contrast, if we look at David HaMelech, we see the discomfort of David HaMelech when he's in a similar situation. If we look in Shmuel Bet Perek Zayin, okay, David HaMelech, he's sitting in his home. God grants him the safety from all of the enemies around him. And what is the first thing that he wants to do? This he tells Natan HaNavi, I see here I'm dwelling in a house of cedar, right? That means I have a substantial, safe, secure home. While the ark of the Lord abides in a tent, right? The Mishkan, there's no Beit HaMikdash that's standing. We see the comfort of the people that Chaggai is addressing during our time of Shivat Zion, and it's in contrast to David HaMelech, that he looks at his own house and he's able to see something is not right here, something is disproportionate. Whereas the people in Chaggai, they're quite comfortable. They're very comfortable in their houses, that they have this apathy, right? That they have this, that they've stopped building. And it's very easy to say, well, we're not allowed to build. We've been told, right, from the previous Persian king, we have to stop building. And so therefore the Navi has to come in, interpret the events, and tell them to wake up. And what's incredible here about Sefer Chaggai is that the people actually listen. Right? We don't see that quite often, that Nevi'im's words are heeded to, right? If we reflected upon Yirmiyahu, that his words were scorned, we see that the people come, and if you go through the prakim, we won't have time to go through the rest of the parak, that they listen, right? They listen and they start to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. In parak bet of Sefer Chaggai, we see that he goes back to this problem that we've been addressing until now, the problem of the lack of desire to build the Beit HaMikdash, that everyone is busy in their own corner, figuring out their own house, their own plans. And Chaggai he has this test, right? This is the test of sanctity versus impurity. If we look in the Psukim, so Hashem says, seek a ruling from the priests as follows, okay? And he asks that question, if a man is carrying sacrificial flesh in a fold of his garment, okay? And with that fold touches bread, stew, wine, oil, or any other food, will the latter become holy? Okay, so he has sacrificial flesh. He has a korban, which is kadosh, it's holy. If it touches something else, right? Anything else, bread, stew, wine, oil, any other food, will that become oil? Will that become holy? Does it have the power to make that holy? And what do the priests say? We say no, right? Something that's kadosh, it can't turn something else kadosh, okay? Chaggai goes on in Pasuk Yud Gimel. If someone defiled by a corpse touches any of the things that were listed above, will it be defiled? And the priest responds, yes, right? It's able, the tum'ah is able to spread. Tum'ah is able to cause whatever it touches to become defiled as well, okay? And so Chaggai says to them in Pasuk Yudaled, Vaya'an Chaggai vayomer ken ha'amazeh. Okay, so he's giving him this is a mashal, an analogy, right? He's saying, that is how this people and that is how this nation looks to me, declares the Lord. And so too, the work of their hands, whatever they offer there is defiled. The kol maseh yadehem ba'asher yakrivu sham tamehu. Whatever sacrifices that they're giving now, it's considered to me to be defiled. And if we look at Ibn Ezra, and he explains here, right? There's something that has sanctity. It doesn't have the power to cause something else to become kadosh, right? Through any type of contact. But something that's impure, right? Something that's impure can cause something else to be tameh. And he's using this analogy. And also the Ibn Ezra brings in how Natan also uses an analogy for David HaMelech. In the story of David and Bathsheba, he brings him a whole analogy so that he can see the picture objectively, right? And then after he gives him an analogy and David gives him an answer to the question, only then does the Natan Navi say to him, the man in the story is you, right? And so too here, he's asking this question, this rhetorical question about Kedusha and Tum'ah, and he's saying to them, the Navi is saying to them, this is what your korbanot are like, right? Because that they are building houses in order to dwell in them, while the Beit HaMikdash is still standing there in ruins. So Rav Yoel Ben Nun, on a very interesting article, part of a much, much longer article. If anyone wants it, I recommend to read it, but just a part of this article, he has this paragraph here that I think he explains this really well. Hence, we deduce that the manifestation of holiness in the world requires human effort and action. In the absence of this human investment, it will not appear miraculously from heaven. Only impurity and defilement can spread on their own, as it were, without any human effort. Therefore, declares the prophet, all sacrifices that are now being offered upon the altar in the absence of the temple are impure, because the people have no wish to build it. They're waiting for it to appear on its own, to descend from heaven. However, the heavenly response is a drought as a result of their apathy and self-centeredness. I think that this analogy of purity and sanctity is very powerful. As we know from our own lives, negativity, right? If we turn it into negativity and positivity, right? Negativity is something that spreads really easily without any effort. If you want to knock down a building, it can take a few hours. You just take the tractor and knock the whole building down. You can do it in a day. But in order to build something, it could take years, brick by brick, right? Positivity also, if we want to bring something good into the world, we need to build it. It requires human actions, right? And so what we see here in Chaggai, from the psukim that we're speaking about, is that the people became passive. They became used to they were used to the reality that they were in, the reality in which they couldn't build, that they weren't able to build the Beit HaMikdash. So they started to focus inwards on their own houses, and they forgot what was happening around them. How often do we get used to a non-ideal? Do we become comfortable with non-ideal realities in our own personal lives? Right? I think that everyone here can attest to that you get used to something that's a non-ideal comfort zone, right? Because it's comfortable and because you're used to it and time has passed and you kind of give up from trying to change it. And so too on a national level as well, right? I've been teaching Sefer Ezra and Nehemiah in Yavna girls, and I asked the girls this question: if you were living at this time, when we were able to go back and rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, would you have gone back? You're already comfortable in Bavel, right? Would you have gone back? I would say most of them answered no, right? And because they said honestly, we don't really feel the lack of having a Beit HaMikdash. We don't really feel like we need it in our lives. Right? We go to school, that's what's important. That's our schoolwork, our family lives, our friends, whatever it is that we're used to. We don't really feel that lack. We don't feel like we're deprived. We don't even know what we're missing, right? Because we've just become so used to exile. And this is 2,000 years later, right? That after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, we're in a galut now, and we're very comfortable with it. We don't necessarily feel that lacking, right? Sometimes we may feel it when we go to the Kotel and we see the Golden Dome, right? The mosque up there, and maybe we might have that kind of like aching feeling, like, I wish I could go through this wall and walk up to Har HaBayit. But then we walk away and we go back to our personal lives, we go back to our own homes, and we forget and we lose that desire and we have that apathy. Chaggai's call to us, Chaggai is saying to us, and I think his message is so powerful now, because I could hear his message just resonating with the slumber that we're in. Is it time for us to be sitting in our own personal homes while the Beit HaMikdash is standing in ruins? So as what's incredible about the Nevi'im and about Tanakh is that it's just as relevant then, it's just as relevant today as it was relevant then, right? The only difference now is that we don't have a Navi. And we can really, at this point, we really need a Navi. We really need a prophet in our times, because the prophet, what the prophet was there for was to come to interpret the reality, to come in and to tell us if we need to redirect, right? If we need to put the Waze on and to go in a different direction. Google Maps was sending us to the wrong place, right? The route is off. We need to go on a different route. When we don't have a Navi now, right? All we have is, we have our Torah, we have our Rabbanim, and we all read the messages around us. I think that in our times, it's very, very clear, right? That in our times that we have this state of Israel, a miraculous event that was against all odds after we were almost completely destroyed in the Holocaust, right? 6 million Jews, and then suddenly we have this miraculous state. We have this ability, right, to be able to return and to build. Are we going to say to ourselves, maybe not now, maybe I'm just going to focus on my own personal life? We're going to look at the national picture. What's going on with Am Yisrael? And say, I want to be part of that story. And simu livavchem al darchechem, as Chaggai says 5 times. Right? If you look through the psukim, these words appear. Look around, try to interpret, try to understand what message is God telling us. Sheniskeh, that we should in our times be able to hear the messages that God is sending us, not through Nevi'im, but through just circumstances, through our current reality, right? That we should be able to interpret it correctly, fulfill his will, and be able to build the Beit HaMikdash speedily in our days. Does anybody have